those in the back that are standing, please come get seats. And there are plenty up front if you folks would like some. Thank you very much. My name is Gary Everton. I'm with EOA Architects, and I've been asked to be the moderator tonight. Thank you. Please keep your seats. We are going to be hearing from two of the AMP design team members tonight. As many of you know, back in January, MTA had a series of meetings where we were asking for public input, and almost 1,500 people attended those meetings. Many people had some very important issues raised, and tonight the folks are here to address those issues and to tell you what the team's been doing since January. You're going to hear from Steve Goodrow. He's the lead project engineer with CDM Smith, and Jeff Hammond is the traffic engineer with RPM Transportation. Now, tonight we have given you, as you entered, a chance to fill out a comment card. If you have questions tonight, we would like for you to write the questions on the comment card and hand them to the volunteers. Volunteers, would you wave your hand? Yeah, thank you. Very nice volunteers. If you've got a question, so that everyone can hear and so that we can actually get it to the people that are watching at home on live stream, we'd like for you to write it down, hand it to the volunteer. They're going to be assembling the questions, and many of the questions will be similar. So we're going to try and group them in. These questions are about lane widths or whatever they happen to be about. Now, if you're watching at home, you'll be able to ask questions on the Metro 3 YouTube website, and feed your questions in by way of the YouTube website. And again, our panel of experts in the back that understand IT will be receiving those and handing them to our volunteers. So we will leave about 20 minutes towards the end of tonight's presentation for questions. And we may not be able to get to every single question in 20 minutes. The team will stay as long as they need to. They didn't know I was going to say that. To answer any questions that you might have. But seriously, we want your input. We really would like to have the questions. There were a number of questions that have been raised, and our team will be addressing those. So we have a limited time frame for the presentation portion, and then we will have questions. So in order to get right on with it, Steve Goodrow is going to take it from here.
Thank you, Gary. Tonight, what we're going to be doing is just touch base, let you know what's new on the AMP, and then we're also going to review the outcomes of the workshops that we had in January, and then we're going to touch on just the updates for the traffic analysis, and then we're going to review next steps for the project itself. As we know, in March, the FTA made an announcement on funding, and currently there's $27 million in the President's budget for this project. And this is pretty exciting because there's 26 projects out there that have been funded, and Nashville's project has been funded, so that's pretty exciting there. The other announcement is in April, Mayor Dean has asked that the design team would take a look at mixed flow traffic from I-440 west to White Bridge, as well as mixed flow traffic from I-40 to the Broadway split. And also, at the same time, he introduced the concept of a community action committee, and that has begun at this point as well. Also in April, Mayor Dean identified the members of the Citizen Advisory Committee, and that this meeting would occur at the last Tuesday of each month, and that would continue on through October. On April 17th, I think we've all heard that the Tennessee legislature passed some legislation. The big thing is that the project will continue and move forward. The second piece of that is that we have an added approval process where we need to have the General Assembly approve the project. Metro and TDOT will be approving it as well, but those approvals have been always in the process. And then on April 29th, we had our first CAC meeting, and again, those meetings will continue on through October. Now, if we just want to shift to the comments, back in January, we had a number of workshops. We had 5 workshops, and we had over 1,200 people attend, and we had 526 comments received. Also, since then, we've met with 7 different groups to talk about some very specific design issues, and we also have met with TDOT as well as Metro to discuss the design plans themselves. Tonight, though, we're not going to talk about some of those changes particularly. Those are going to be routed back through the CAC committee as those meetings continue. So tonight, what we're going to focus on are the questions that came up from the comment cards that we had received last time. So the focus will be on some of those comments. But we will be returning back to those design issues after we've reviewed some of these items with the CAC. As you can see from this chart, we took a look at all the comments, and the top on the list, obviously, is traffic issues related to congestion and U-turns. And the second group of comments are related to bikes and peds, parking, and just how the bus lanes would operate. The next group kind of fell with funding and ridership and station design and ADA kinds of issues. And then following that, there were a number of issues that were raised. They related to Charlotte Avenue. They also looked at questions related to historic preservation, fares, emergency vehicles, as well as right-of-way kinds of things. So what we're going to do is touch on some of these as we move along in the next few slides. To start with, we're just going to take a look at station design. And as you can see on the left, this is a rendering of the AMP center station. And on the left is just an example of how level boarding would work for a pedestrian. As you can see, level boarding allows pedestrians and ADA patrons to easily get on and off the bus. The station design would also allow the fact that amenities would be arranged so that it would be easy to get around them. At the intersections, what we would anticipate is that there would be push buttons on the curbside, as well as push buttons in the center for pedestrians, and then, of course, we would be utilizing traffic signals. In the center, of course, there would be crosswalks, and then a ramp that would be designed according to ADA criteria, so that we wouldn't need any handrails or anything. They'd have a gentle slope of about 2%. We would envision some sort of a bollard system. Now, other systems look at these, the ramping structures and the bollards, and they try to consider using fences. And so we're going to be also looking at fences. The details on this would be, again, looped through the CAC committee for the details to make sure that, the whole community is on board with our plans. This slide here shows some curbside stations. Again, on the left, you can see a sketch of the AMP station, and on the right is a photo of a curbside station that's been installed in Grand Rapids. What you want to note, though, is that the sidewalks would raise up at a gentle slope so that pedestrians can access those stations. And also on the curbside station, notice that pedestrians would be able to walk through the station, so there would not be any blockage or things like that with the station itself, so it would be very easy to use. The next slide is a rendering of a mid-block crossing. With some of the changes that we've had, the number of mid-block sections number of mid-block stations have been reduced. We're down to about 2 in the west end section. What we want to note, though, is that traffic signals will be utilized at the crosswalks themselves, and then the crosswalks will be designed in a standard fashion. They'll be marked as any other crosswalk would, with white paint and the appropriate stop bars. In our work with TDOT, they had asked us to take a look at safety records of various mid-block crossings throughout the country, and this chart demonstrates how that they are safe in comparison to other kinds of treatments. And as you can see here, for signalized crosswalks, they are the most safe. what you can see is that drivers yield to those more than other kinds of options, as in flashers and signs. So we feel that the mid-blocks signals are much safer than any other treatment that we could apply. And so that's what we're using. Now if we shift to bikes and pedestrians, what we want to say is that, again, bike racks will be provided in the buses themselves as well as on the stations, and we feel that this arrangement will complement the existing parallel bike routes that are developed throughout the city. For ADA purposes, we're going to be designed according to current standards. We're going to have, again, the truncated domes at the curb sides, and the stations and the sidewalks will be designed to meet all ADA criteria. Again, we'll be utilizing pedestrian countdown ped heads as well as push buttons. We could have those to be vibratory, we could have them auditory, but we'll utilize all the current design standards for ADA on crosswalks. Now, a number of comments came up regarding left turns and U-turns. What's shown here is a U-turn, left turn situation in a center running BRT location. And where there is center running BRT, the left turns, U-turns would be allowed at signalized intersections. We're keeping all the signalized intersections in those sections of the road where there's center running BRT. And what would happen is, again, when there's a green light, there would be a phase that would allow you to turn around as a U-turn or also make a left. What I do want to point out, though, is in the mixed flow sections, because again, there would not be center running buses, left turns in mid-block would be allowed, so the need for U-turns and some of these left turns would not be quite as important in those sections. So that's a key takeaway. And what we're doing is we're going to look at U-turns to make sure that they work for cars as well as light single unit trucks. A number of questions came up about the types of operations. And as you can see in the top left, this is a center running dedicated BRT. In the lower left, this is a mixed flow running BRT. Again, it runs right along with the auto traffic. And then on the right side, just as an option that's out there, there are dedicated curb running options throughout the country that are used. Again, these different options can be mixed and matched to meet the corridor needs. So that's not unusual as well. Just kind of running down what we've seen on other projects. Clearly, the center running is faster. It's fast because it's not competing with all the other cars. It gets green lights going through the signals. So again, the center running is faster. The curbside and say BRT light or express services, those are again a little bit slower. And the reason for that is because you're in the curb lane, you need to compete with those right turns. And also, if it's mixed flows, you have to compete with traffic in the lane itself. And then certainly the existing service, typically those would be the slowest. There would be no priority for those, and they would run a lot slower. Just considering parking, we got a number of comments on parking throughout the project, throughout the various meetings. We are going to be eliminating parking on the curbside for the project. We anticipate that to be about 400 spaces. However, we are anticipating four park and ride lots throughout the corridor that would help with some of that. During the workshops, we did get some comments about parking in the neighborhoods, and we're going to be monitoring that. And Nashville already has a process to allow for a permitting process if a neighborhood sees that there's parking that would take away from residential parking. So we'd monitor that situation, and then should there be parking that takes away from the residents, we'd work with the neighborhood community group so that maybe there would be a permit process that could be put in place in that neighborhood. Historic preservation, we got some comments on that. Clearly there are some beautiful and historic structures throughout the entire corridor, and our goal will be to preserve that and that we would follow all the environmental regulatory requirements for the project, and we would not want to disturb any of that. Lane widths, a number of comments came up about lane widths. Like I said, we've been talking with TDOT, and we've settled on what we want to call preferred widths and minimum widths. We'd be utilizing the minimum widths where there's restrictions. As you can imagine, going down the corridor, there's sections where there's buildings close and that we have to use minimum standards in those locations. So what we've determined is our criteria is that we'd have a 12-foot center platform. For the bus lane, we'd have a 12-foot preferred width where we can fit that in, or 11-foot minimum where it would be necessary for restrictions. The through lanes, we'd have an 11-foot preferred and a 10-foot minimum. And along the curb lane, we would have, again, a 12-foot preferred, 11-foot minimum. And in all cases, we'd be looking to have an 8-foot preferred for the sidewalk or a 6-foot minimum. But for us to use a 6-foot minimum, there would have to be no trees, no utilities, or anything like that above the surface. But our goal would be to provide 8-foot in all locations with a 3-foot utility or landscape strip and a 5-foot walkway. What I do want to point out, though, is that the bus lane can be used by emergency vehicles. And why that is there's going to be no separation, no physical barrier between the through lanes and the bus lane itself. What we envision is certainly there would be some striping and maybe some rumble strips so that the emergency vehicles could use the space in there to expedite their trip. The next couple slides are just some examples so that we can kind of explain how this works. Just starting at Murphy Road, this is probably one of the most congested places on the corridor, and it also has some historic components. As you can see on the left side, there is a wall. That's a historic wall and a sidewalk, and then a landscape strip. And then what I want you to notice is that there's 3 lanes, 3 travel lanes, a middle lane, and again, 3 lanes on the right side. And then down here is the proposed section, and our intention is to widen to the left towards the wall and then put the sidewalk on the back side. But with this widening, it allows us to put back in the 3 lanes, both inbound and outbound. And then again, because this is one of the most critical traffic sections, we've put in a bi-directional bus lane here so that we only need 1 in this particular spot. But what happens with this arrangement is that we maintain the 3 lanes so that there's no loss of capacity in this area. So that's a key point to just keep in mind. Again, moving up the road at 21st Avenue, let's take a look at that. Again, up here is the top is the existing section. And along the curb line, you see that some parked vehicles. And again, as we mentioned before, we're going to be removing some of the all the parked vehicles. But in the process of doing that, we maintain 2 lanes in each direction, just like it is today. And I just wanted to point out that we do have a median separating the lanes, but that's mountable. So what that means is emergency vehicles can cross that easily, so that wouldn't hinder their operation. But again, just wanted to point out the same idea. 2 lanes are maintained in each direction, just like it is today, 2 travel lanes. And so there's really no loss of through capacity at this point. Other items, right-of-way. Obviously, we're going to need right-of-way at some locations where we have to put in stations. We're going to need some right-of-way where there's the need for some wider lanes. And where we need to have compliant sidewalks with ADA, again, we're going to need some additional right-of-way. However, I just want to point out that in some of the mixed flow areas, again, that's going to lessen some of the right-of-way. So that's good for the right-of-way. But in all cases, we're going to have to take some right-of-way on the project. Looking at construction impacts, our intent would be is to maintain travel lanes in each direction. As you can imagine, you can put traffic on one side of the road and do construction on the other side, allowing traffic to move through. And then we would intend to use like rolling closures is what I like to call those. You'd block out a certain portion of the road, not the whole road, and the contractor would be required to come in, do his work, finish the section, and then move the section forward. That would be the way we'd want that done. We would be trying to minimize any peak hour disturbance so that the traffic could continue to flow best in peak hours. We'd expect some flexible work hours. What that means is there may be some times where there's early morning or late evening work. And we'd also be looking at noise restrictions where we see that there's residential properties along the way. There were questions on the environmental document. Currently, we're in the process of preparing the environmental, And we're also updating it for some of the recent changes. And when that is done, we'll get a notice of availability from the FTA, and then it'll be open for public comment. Following the public comment period, we would resolve those comments and update the document again to make a final EA, and then we would make a submittal to get a FONSI, finding of no significant impact. Again, that's the process. But at this point, we're in the midway, and we're updating for these recent changes. Regarding fares and operations, we're expecting the fares to be the same as the regular bus, and we're looking at 10-minute headways in the peak hour and 15 in non-peak. There were questions on capital cost, and how they're divided today is the bulk of it is in transit and transportation improvements, which is $76 million. Station and park and ride is $25 million. And vehicles and right-of-way is $22 million. And streetscape enhancements is $38 million. And then traffic operation and maintenance is $13 million. And that totals $174 million. Regarding the breakdown of funding, we're looking at $75 million with federal contribution. We're looking at 94 with state and local, and $5 million with the MPO. Now, before I transition to traffic, I just want to provide a little bit of background. Nashville, as many of you know, is one of the fastest growing economies in the United States. And what that means is there's businesses and residents relocating here, moving here. And, you know, that success is causing a lot of good things, a lot of jobs, there's more people, more traffic. And what we need to consider is, how do we continue that success and still move more people where they want to go? The solutions are complex, no doubt. The solutions are controversial, no doubt. But what we want to do is move more people. So with that, I'd like to just introduce Jeff. Jeff, would you come up and talk to us about traffic?
Thank you, Stephen. And it does go without saying, perhaps, but we always do want to remind ourselves that this project is about moving people. And it is a good thing that we have traffic, that we have a lot of people wanting to go here and there in this corridor to visit the shops, to go to the restaurants, to make their way home, to go to work, and all of the great activities that make West End such a vibrant place to be in such a critical part of our city. But we don't want good congestion. We'll take the traffic. We like the movement and we like the activity. What we don't want is the congestion. And we know when Steve showed you that the #1 comment coming out of January's public meetings had to do with traffic and turns and congestion and those kind of things. We know what you meant by that, and that was that there is a significant and a very well-founded concern that with some of the lane configurations that are being proposed as part of this project, that might have an impact on traffic. And so that's what I want to talk a little bit about here in the next few slides. Since our last meeting, from a traffic perspective, we've been engaged on a number of tasks. Some of those are shown here. Now that we're in the full design phase, coordination with TDOT is and continues to be critical. And we've been putting a lot of our traffic projection assumptions and those kind of things and our modeling procedures in front of TDOT, and we continue to work with them, as well as with Metro and the various Metro agencies that have jurisdictional organization over the roadways that we're dealing with in this project. We've also updated our 2018 base year model. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. We continue the modeling efforts. And just so you know, the analysis and the results that I'm going to talk about do come from traffic models that we build that helps us analyze the roadway and the intersections in the 7-mile corridor. There where it talks about curb and center BRT model. Since April, that has become the emphasis of our work and will continue to be so through the next few months. And that is the newest alternative that we are looking at and how BRT service will be laid into this corridor in terms of a center running configuration as well as a curb running alignment in some cases. We're fulfilling our full build of the AM and PM peak model, just to say we look, and this is conventional in almost all traffic work. We look at those AM and PM peak or rush hours, the heaviest times of day on typical weekday periods, to make sure we have a good conservative analysis. And then we're also looking at a further build condition, looking a little bit further into the future. For now, the most important tool that we have is the 2018 build model that continues to be in progress. We have a lot of it done. A lot of it still remains left to do. Traffic counts were updated earlier this year. We've also, as this is a very dynamic corridor, have been continuing to revise our projections in terms of development that we think is coming to this corridor. A few weeks ago, HCA made a pretty significant announcement for us that they would be elsewhere and not located here, and that was a big change that we have taken into account in our models. I also think it's worth pointing out that we do make this a very conservative look at traffic in the near-term future. And a couple of things, and that is, one, we don't assume anyone who's driving on the corridor will do anything other than drive on the corridor in the future. In other words, we don't pull traffic off and assume that they are going to use the AMP service. We do know that will happen, but again, to ensure our conservative look at the traffic impacts, we assume that nobody would do that, and we don't assume anybody would leave and take another corridor either. So everyone that's out there on the corridor today, we assume will be there in the future. And we do this conservative look for two reasons. Number one, this becomes the basis of our design. So when we're looking at turn lane links, U-turn links, signal timings, and those kind of things, we want to make sure that we're really giving this a good look as we design those critical elements. And also ensure that we're doing our best that we can to ensure an adequate level of service for everybody. When we talk about traffic, we know there's people walking, we know there's people driving, we know there are transit users, we know there will be future transit users. All modes need to be serviced and done so adequately. And where that has meant scaling back on the design, as Steve pointed out, where we go to a single transit way instead of two, we do that if that's what traffic has called for, and that's been a big part of our modeling activity. If I could put everything in a nutshell, I would say it probably this way, and we'll go into a little more detail on some of these findings, that traffic, as all of you know, and anyone who drives in this corridor knows, is bad, can be very bad at times. That's going to worsen as time goes, and that's just a natural aspect of living in a growing community that we're happy to be in. Also, that the AMP is going to ease congestion over time. We have a lot of case studies from around the country that the longer these systems are in place, they become an integrated and integral part of the community. And over time, they're very successful. But what we're also concerned with is, in the meantime, what does that do to traffic? And so that's the kind of things we're looking at in that 2018 conservative base year. And again, never forget, what we're looking at is the potential to move very large numbers of people into this corridor as it continues to grow. And this growth is a big part of our analysis work. Metro Planning Commission has given us 32 individual developments that are located within 1/2 mile of this corridor. Every one of those, as you know, has travel demands associated with them. So we calculate those, we forecast those go into our 2018 base year model. It's important to know we have not taken into consideration things that are really geared towards special event type traffic. So the new ballpark, the amphitheater here just down the street, those kind of things are not considered, because we really are looking at that good general AM and PM rush hour type condition. So when we add all this development traffic in, what do we find? We find that we expect over the next 3 or 4 years, this new development, which all of these are currently working their way through various stages of the planning process, to add about 14,000 new trips per day. Now I want to put that in some perspective for you. Currently the corridor has just a shade under 50,000 cars per day on it. as its heaviest volume location. Put it another way to you, 14,000 vehicles per day is about the capacity, the maximum car carrying capacity of a two-lane road. So if you think of some of the two-lane roads that we're familiar with here that flow pretty heavy during those peak periods, we might think of Woodmont Boulevard, Battery Lane. Both of those facilities have about 14,000 vehicles per day currently. So with this and with any other project, we have at least two alternatives. One of those is we can do nothing about it and let those conditions continue to grow as they will. And as I mentioned, and as you know, the congestion that exists now will only worsen in the future, and those impacts will become more severe as time goes on. So 2018 is one thing, but as development continues to go and happen in this corridor, those conditions will worsen even more. I put it in a graphic form for you this way. This comes from our modeling analysis. The white line there extending out of the left-hand slide designates the length of the queue that you would experience as you travel west from downtown toward I-440 in the evening. So you know if you're heading out of downtown going past Centennial Park and you're trying to get to 440 or White Bridge Road or somewhere west of this location, you hit traffic at a point. And the white line designates where you hit traffic on an average PM case. And that is roughly at the supermarket location there at about 29th Avenue. What we are finding that if we go with the do nothing option and we don't address this, by the 2018 base case analysis, we would expect that queue to lengthen by about 500 feet, and that'll put you back down to the western edge of Centennial Park at 27th Avenue, and obviously that kind of thing has travel time impacts associated with it. That's one alternative. The other alternative that we have before us as part of this project is BRT service. As Steve pointed out, this is probably the critical location. We heard that anecdotally from you in the January public meetings. We know this case is here. This is the intersection of Murphy Road and West End, which really becomes one of our critical locations. Again, thinking about making that trip in the evening hours headed west. Once you clear Murphy Road, things flow pretty well from there until you get back down closer again to White Bridge Road. And so this location becomes very critical for us in our analysis because it really governs how westbound evening flow works in the West End corridor through Midtown. And as Steve pointed out, and this is just a bird's eye look instead of a cross-section look, the lanes here at this location are generally identical to what the only difference is on the eastbound direction. The right turn into Orleans Drive, which is a very minor right turn movement, would now share a lane instead of having its own exclusive lane. Everything else, the lanes that really matter to us from a traffic perspective, all remain intact in the build condition. There are some locations where parking is not allowed even during off-peak times, and we know that those locations stack traffic 3 deep all the way through them in the evening. We're very aware of that. That shows in our models, and we know that to be the case. And this project would change that. And so when we're able to say down at the bottom of this slide that we can actually improve traffic operations, that's car traffic operations, in addition to doing this project, I need to explain that a little bit. There are two locations that are critical. One I already mentioned was Murphy Road. The other is 31st Avenue. At both of those intersections, there are some things that we can do from a traffic perspective to change the way the lanes function, to change the way the signals function, to get more time back to the main line without impacting those side streets. And that's what we do. And what I'm talking about is changing the way those lanes are used and which lanes go in which direction, and we can get a much more efficient signal timing pattern when we do that. And so we do have to make some traffic improvements for these results to be seen. And when we do that, what it results in, we think, are some pretty positive aspects to the project from a traffic perspective. So I'll go back to this slide again. I'm going to introduce now the green line at the bottom. And as I mentioned earlier, things don't really get better if we're thinking about it in today's terms, but over the course of the project, we certainly believe that traffic operations will be improved over the no-build condition in that 2018 base case. So we can mitigate the effects of the lane configurations that are part of this project, we believe, with some traffic improvements. But we also want to remember that the point of this project is about moving people and more people and the amount of traffic that's coming because of new development. And so what I want to do is try to demonstrate some of the potential that we've got in doing that we wouldn't otherwise have with any other type of improvement project that we might think about. Just for example, I mentioned we have just a shade under 50,000 cars per day on the road. Here in Nashville, our auto occupancy is just hovering just a little above 1. We can roughly say that equates to generally 50,000 people per day driving their vehicles on this corridor. BRT systems like this one can add 30,000 or more riders per day potentially. If we assume a ridership of 15,500, and that would equate to a 5-minute frequency, and we would be thrilled if in the future demand required us to do that. That would be a solid utilization of the system, but not anywhere near its capacity. Add that to the 50,000 that's there now, and we see that this corridor could potentially carry 65,000 people per day in it, where it currently carries about 50. And what I want to point out here is to us is a significant thing that on the left you have what is proposed, the roadway and the BRT service that can carry that 65,000. West End right now is in a pretty elite class in terms of arterial roadways. That means non-interstate type roadways that carry as much traffic as it does. I have to look to Memphis before I find another one anywhere around here that carries as much traffic as West End does. And it works very hard, and it does a great job with the infrastructure that is in place. But to think about another 14,000, 15,000 trips per day coming on this corridor, I have to look to other types of facilities to see that number. I have to look out at I-40 at Bellevue before I see 65,000 trips per day, or Vietnam Veterans Boulevard coming out of Hendersonville to find that much traffic on a roadway of any type, much less a surface street that has as much access and as much activity as we all like seeing on West End. So the positive thing about this is it gives us that people carrying capacity and the car carrying capacity that we experience today, and really maintains the character of the road that we enjoy, and really, I think, enhances that with a new type of transit service.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Just touch again on our next steps. May to October, we're going to be working with the Citizen Advisory Committee and reviewing some of the design details as the project develops. And then in the summer, we're looking to update our design plans and continue to work on our environmental documents. And then in the fall, we're hoping to get our notice of availability and get the environmental document out to the public for comment. At that time, we would have another public meeting. And in the fall, we'd also like to begin right-of-way plans and begin our construction documents. So that's what we're looking for the next steps. Gary, I'd like you to come up and take on the next step here.
Thank you, Steve. All right, just to reiterate, if you have a question, we'd like for you to write it on a comment card and hand it to one of our volunteers. If you need a comment card, didn't pick one up, raise your hand. Or if you have a comment card already with a question on it, raise the card up, and our lovely volunteers will come bring questions to you. All right. We've got several comments that are coming in from online. Thank you, Wally. Wally says, hi, moderator. Did the new laws passed on BRT at General Assembly affect the AMP? How will it make the plans change? Steve?
Yeah, the new laws have affected the AMP. The good thing is the project's still moving forward. However, in our process, we're going to have to get approval for the project through the General Assembly. We're currently working with TDOT and others to understand the exact administrative role of that, but we're going to work that into our schedule and into our process.
Thank you. We've got a question coming in from someone on Church Street. He says, what is the plan for downtown routing? If Fifth Avenue is used, it should return to one-way. It has been bad as a two-way. You, Steve?
Boy, you know, that's a great question. I think over the last 2-3 months, we've actually been working on different downtown schemes. We're going to be, again, routing some of these choices through the CAC committee. And once we do that, then we can make some of these other options public. But we are working really hard with Metro, TDOT, and we will begin working with the CAC on coming up with what that route will be. But we believe it'll be a much better route. Thank you.
Okay, we've had some questions about the state. This one says, how do you act as if AMP is a sure thing when the state has made the vote that it has made? You want to field that one?
We're following the process at this point. I mean, clearly, all our funding is not in place quite yet, but we're working on that. We're working on options, value engineering options, so that maybe we can bring the cost down. But like any large project like this, all the funding doesn't usually come in place until you're pretty far along. So this isn't unusual at this step, but we are working on options to figure out different ways to take care of the state portion.
Okay, we've got another question that came up about the funding. This question says, you keep saying you have funding of $27 million. This is proposed in the 2015 federal budget. Nothing has been approved. Also, FTA has not even received a complete application form from Metro. I think your statements are misleading. Steve?
The good news is we're in the president's budget, so that's a real positive. Certainly, the budget has to be approved, so it is a proposal. I mean, we're not going to deny that. That is what it is. But the great news is out of the 26 projects that are in the United States, Nashville is one of those. It's a very competitive project, so we can be pretty excited that we've made it this far. So that's great.
Okay, this one looks like it's for Jeff. From Robert Self. If this is to help with traffic, how can lane removal even be considered?
Well, we fielded a lot of questions like this at the January public meetings. And in a lot of cases, we were able to show people, and as you stand and look at the drawings, how, in fact, in a lot of cases, a lane is not being removed. In other cases, a significantly underutilized lane is being removed. Steve referred to it as a parking lane, which through Midtown it is for all but 4 hours of the day. So 20 hours of the day, those are parking lanes, and those are being removed. It is posted that those are to be no parking lanes during the peak period, but as anyone who travels the corridor know, that doesn't always become the case, and so we find more traffic, or very little traffic, I guess, in the outside lane actually traveling through, using that as a through lane during those critical times. And then in the new part, I guess the new scenario west of 440, the lanes without having an exclusive transit lane will remain much as they are today.
Thank you, Jeff. Don't go far. How does it make a 32-foot turn? The AMP itself, how does it make a turn?
That continues to be a design issue that is being worked through. There's a couple of things that involve turns. One is the amp itself, the bus making a turn. Those turning templates, we call them, are just the design term for how we analyze that, and we use survey information. We know exactly where the curb lines are now, and what would need to happen, if anything, if it couldn't make that turn, and so we study those very carefully. The other aspect about turning is U-turns, and that has come up, and those also are being designed accordingly. We know that it can handle a lot of different types of vehicles, certainly passenger cars up to single unit UPS type trucks and those kind of things. So we continue to work through some of the larger vehicle characteristics of using the corridor.
Thank you, sir. This question has to do with the balance between automotive traffic and AMP traffic. Have we compromised the project too much in regards to automotive traffic? If people are to use the bus, it needs to be further and higher priority than automotive traffic. Steve?
At this point, we now have two models that we're looking at. One is with the center running, as it was in the original plan, and we're also beginning a model with the mixed flow sections. And we'll be able to compare what the difference is. And our goal would be is to find a solution that can satisfy all the needs on the corridor. Jeff, did you want to add anything?
I will just add that the mayor's announcement in April and the subsequent bringing on of the Citizens Advisory Committee is doing, I think, exactly what is intended, and that's mixed news for us, because we have to get much more creative. When we have comments like this, we now have to look, in a different way at this. And working with Steve and his designers, our design team has really come together to figure out what are those impacts. And we think we're closing in on some solutions and some ways we can continue to get the AMP vehicle through these congested areas without having a dedicated lane. And so we I think, are certainly meeting the spirit and understand the nature of that comment and why that change has been made, and continue to improve this project. And that's exactly what forums like has happened in the past and like we're having here tonight are intended to do.
Okay, here's another question. Where are the bike lanes?
Currently, for bikes, we're providing bike racks on the buses. We're providing bike racks in the stations. There really isn't room on the corridor itself for bike lanes. Given the restricted area that we have between the buildings and needing 8-foot sidewalks and the various traffic lanes, there really isn't room. However, the city does have some really great facilities that they've been installing, and I think by putting the bike racks actually on the bus and at the stations, I think this will complement these adjacent facilities.
All right, here's another interesting question. What percentage of West End traffic is from Nashville? And how do you know?
We could find out if there was someone really wanting to know. We've not done an origin and destination study. We've done them before, but we do not have that data right now, but we could get that. Thanks.
Here's another question came in from the online audience. Will there be dedicated lanes downtown? If not, won't the AMP get stuck in traffic downtown?
Downtown is very restricted on right-of-way. We're not intending to have dedicated bus lanes in the downtown area, although there will be transit signal priority that we'll be using. And we're going to be working really hard with the traffic signal system to move the buses through the downtown area. Do you want to add anything to that? Okay.
Another question from the audience. Why did the center lane go away in some locations? This seems like a great loss to the project. Bring back the full center BRT model.
As you can imagine, there's a lot of needs and desires along the corridor. So at this point, we're evaluating both options. And once we're done evaluating that, we can understand what the real difference between the two alternatives are. So at this point, we're just taking a good look at both.
Here's one you'll all be able to use in cocktail party conversation. How long is a bus?
I think they're about 60 feet.
That was a very confident answer.
There's a lot of different kinds of buses.
There's lots of buses. What are the safety concerns in going back and forth between the center lane and outside lane AMP sections? Good question.
Yeah, that is a good question. What you'll find is we're going to be looking at trying to provide what you call queue jumps. We're going to try to make the break from a center running to a curb lane or curb lane to center running at signal locations. There are places in the original design that also needed these kinds of things. So what you can imagine is, let's say you're in a curb running section, you're in the curb, and you pull up to a signal. What will happen is the signal will understand that that's a bus, and they'll give the bus like 3 or 4 seconds head start of everyone else, so that the bus can get ahead of the other traffic and shift over to the center lane. So that'll be done through signal technology.
Another good question, where do these people park?
Let's start with parking on the corridor. We're looking at 4 park and ride lots. And as the project develops, we'll be monitoring those park and ride lots. And you know, as the system develops and as it becomes better used, there may be a need to be reevaluating some of the parking. But you know, in the meantime, as we begin the project, they'll be at the 4 park and ride locations.
I'd like you to send a shout out to my sister, Beulah Badur, who's visiting from Mississippi. All right, who's writing these questions? Here's one from the audience. What path would the AMP take from 5 Points to Broadway?
At 5 Points, we've had a number of conversations with the community at this point. There's a couple different options that are out there that we're going to be taking to the CAC committee to review, to again get buy-in from the community advisory committee. So at this point, we're not ready to announce which option that is, but we've been working very hard hand in hand with the local community on exactly what the route would be around the 5 Points turnaround there. So I assure you, we've heard. We're just, again, working it through the system. Thank you.
From the local audience here, how will Nashville come up with the money to fund the local park?
At this point, I think it'll be up to policymakers and City Hall to determine how that's going to be made. We're going to be working really hard to value engineering the project. If we can bring down the cost, we will. So we're going to be taking a really close look at, you know, tighten up the right-of-way, try to make sure that we're only installing the things that are absolutely needed. So part of this process is to refine those costs, see if we can bring those costs down some. Thank you.
Here's a question from Sheila Hansen. How will the routing of the AMP be affected downtown when roads are closed for parades, marathons, and music festivals?
We've been working really closely with Metro on that to understand exactly when and how things are closed. The plus side of being a bus rapid transit is that you get transit on rubber wheels. So during some of these big events, it's possible to change the route a little bit. So the route is going to, it can be flexible for events. So I think this really works well for events.
That's a question from Grace Renshaw on Mockingbird Road. How much of AMP buses seating is standing room?
I know on, let's just say, typical articulated buses, I think you can get about 60, 55, 60 seats. And you can, with crush capacity, totally loaded, everybody standing, you can get about 90 people on board.
How much additional right-of-way would be taken between Murphy Road and 31st?
The whole right-of-way issue at this point is in a redesign phase. I mean, with some of these sections now going, when we're looking at the mixed flow sections, we're now reevaluating that. With the mixed flow pieces, certainly the right-of-way is going to decrease. But at this point, we've not got hard numbers on how much at this point. But with the mixed flows, are going to decrease.
This question from Carol Williams. I would like the AMP to be extended 1 mile east with the east terminus in the auto diesel school area. The present east terminus is congested and there are safety issues. Nashville Auto Diesel what's it now called? Lincoln Technology.
What I can say is the project currently is the turnaround at the 5 Points area. We can add that to some options that we could take a look at this point. Thank you.
Here's a question. So where do you expect the 15,000 people to come from that you say will ride the AMP in 2018?
BRT projects nationally have seen pretty strong success. Right now, the Health Line, for instance, it's currently carrying 13,000 on a daily basis, almost like 4.8 million people annually. There's some other lines in Boston that have grown over time, and we do expect that this corridor will grow in ridership as a result of what I want to say is fast, convenient, high quality transit service.
Let me add to that a little bit about how we do our traffic projections, because when I gave the number of 14,000 new trips per day, that stems out of those 32 developments. So for any time an apartment building comes or a new office building comes or a mixed-use development comes, which we know there are a number now that are just poised to open. They're practically built and ready to open. Others are starting to come up out of the ground. Others we have nothing to look at yet because they're still working their way through those planning stages. So a lot of the new trips that are coming are from those types of developments. And there's an industry standard procedure about how we go through those forecasts. That's based on observed data from around the country that we look at. These again are the types of assumptions then that we take to TDOT and say, does this look reasonable? Are we kind of heading in the right direction? And with Metro as well. And we along with our firm RPM, we've been working with CDM and their traffic engineers in various offices. And so there's a lot of people looking at the assumptions and all that go into these traffic forecasts, and so we're pretty confident that we have a good conservative baseline for how much new traffic we believe is coming.
Another question from our local audience here. How is the rapid transit speed affected by eliminating the designated lanes on the west side?
As you can recall from the slide, a couple slides back, running in mixed flow does reduce the speed some. So that's why we're going to go through a process of making a comparison and make sure that we have a system that we can live with.
With your preservation of sites, does that include trees?
Regarding trees, especially at Elmington Park, we were focused on not disturbing any of those trees at all. And other park areas, we're certainly going to be focused on those trees.
Another online question. How will the AMP help residents move around the city when there are large conventions in town?
Well, I think for those that can either get to a park and ride or get near to the AMP and ride the AMP, it would certainly help people get in downtown and back. For those coming to the conventions, it allow them to come out to West End or to East Nashville to enjoy the whole city, not just the downtown area. So I think this would be a real help when there is conventions for the city.
Here's a question from someone who understands the process. Heard you're not doing diversionary traffic analysis. Why? Jeff, you want to take that one?
In fact, we are, and that was a request from the Department of Transportation. It was something that began earlier this year that we are looking at doing that. And for those of you who may not be aware, diversion analysis looks at when the AMP comes to this corridor, what might the changes be that might push traffic to some other corridor. And so we're working with the Metropolitan Planning Organization. They maintain the big regional model. It's a different model than we're using. It's a bigger scale-wise model that looks at those kind of things about major flows in traffic. And so we tweak that model, put some assumptions in there, and then watch what it does and how it sends traffic. And we're currently in the middle of that process now.
And again, like all of our analysis at this point, we're going to run this through TDOT, we're going to run this through Metro, and then we also need to loop this back through the CAC committee itself. And until we've gone through all those steps, the data really would not be published for public consumption at this point. Thank you.
We had promised to wrap up by 7 o'clock, so we're not going to get through all of the questions. These folks will hang around a little bit. JFC in the audience, we're going to wrap up with one of your 3 questions. You might want to hang around and ask the other 2. Why does the AMP start at Bosley Springs Road right in the middle of one of the city's largest bottlenecks, promising to cause more congestion in this difficult area?
The terminus has been picked at a park and ride lot up in the St. Thomas Hospital. We are doing a separate study on the White Bridge West End intersection. That isn't complete yet, but we are doing an entirely separate study to analyze how that's going to work or how we can improve that as part of this project. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to wrap up the questions for now. There is another presentation tomorrow night, same time, same place. If you'd like to attend, you're welcome to attend. We've got a few questions that have not been fielded. I'm going to hand these off to our experts, and if you have submitted one that you didn't hear so far, come by and we'll answer those questions directly. Now, someone on the AMP team will be in contact with you one-on-one if you ask us a specific question that you need further clarification of. So we really appreciate you coming out tonight. We value your input, and we want to get everybody in Nashville riding on the AMP if we can. Thank you for coming.